It's now my pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker and longtime Alliance supporter, Andrew Ference, to the podium. When Andrew Ference is not on the ice playing defense for the Edmonton Oilers, you can find him studying sustainability and innovation at Harvard or speaking at elementary schools about the benefits of composting. He rides his bike to get around town. This morning he rode his bike and back to a mob exercise class. How many of you made it? It's 8 miles there and back on a city bike, which has like one gear. So he had his workout for sure. And he doesn't mind being called a tree hugger. In 2007, with the help of the childhood hero, Canadian environmentalist David Suzuki, Ference established the NHL Players Association's Carbon Neutral Challenge, the first major environmental initiative in professional hockey. He encouraged over 500 of his fellow NHL-ers to go carbon neutral and to rethink the way they treat the environment. As a result, some players have since traded in their SUVs for hybrids. Stadiums have begun to use solar panels to generate electricity, and team members are asking for his advice on how to green their arenas. So let's welcome Andrew to the stage.
All right, am I live? Can you hear me? Happy Canada Day. All right, for everybody that doesn't know what Canada Day is, just imagine the 4th of July, Thanksgiving, and Christmas all like wrapped into one. That's what Canada Day is. It's pretty amazing. So I know you have a little birthday coming up, but this is a big day for us. So where's my clicker? I'm supposed to have, oh, there it is. Perfect. All right. So I've done a lot of traveling in my life. I've seen the migration in the Serengeti. I've even touched and explored the Taj Mahal, and I lived beside a castle in the Czech Republic for a while. But in all these travels, the most interesting man I ever met, I was actually backpacking through the Highlands of Scotland. I stopped in a tiny little town there to have a beer at the local pub, and there's 2 other men in there, the bartender, and there's an older guy in the corner sipping on a pint. He had a really weathered look to him. He had calloused hands and messy hair. So I sat down and ordered a beer from the bartender, and this other guy quickly leaned in close. And you'll have to excuse my weak accent, but he said to me, "You see this bar? I made this bar. Picked the finest wood in the county. Handled it more lovingly than my own kin. Carved it just so. Sanded it for days. Put the finish on just right. This bar's been here for 40 years. You think they call me Angus the bar builder? No." When I say he leaned in close, it was like really uncomfortable close. So I kind of nodded and I was like, "Oh, all right, right on." And I took out my phone. I was like, "Oh, I'm going to tweet or do anything, like not to have this conversation." But it didn't work. So the guy, he goes over to the window and he just starts staring at me until I like literally have to look up. And once he has eye contact with me, he quickly points at the rock wall outside the window. He says, "You see that rock wall? I made that rock wall. I collected the stones, stacked them just so. Bloodied my knuckles, hurt my back, but that wall, it's never moved. Wall's been solid for 30 years. You think they call me Angus the wall builder? No!" He's getting a little angry now. He kept that uncomfortable eye contact, and quickly, like, before I could even look away, he's like, "Which way did you come into town?" And like this town, there's literally one bridge in. Like, there's no other way in. There's the bridge. So no quicker did I answer him. He says, "I built that bridge." I said, "Yeah, I knew." He said, "I cut every piece of wood for it. I plied the logs into the ground until they are rock solid, hammered every nail, tightened every bolt. Bridge has been carrying people and cars for 25 years. But do they call me Angus the Bridge Builder? No! But you one goat. So you can do years of good work, but one screw up. It's a true story. True story. So there's literally never been a time in this world when corporations and individuals alike have been more scrutinized by the public. You don't have to look very far. You know, things like WikiLeaks or Edward Snowden, they prove this at the highest levels. But even smaller secrets are revealed every day by millions of citizen journalists who are busy keeping people and companies honest, one tweet at a time. I also believe it's never been harder to advertise and promote your business than it is today. You know, all this access to information, it's given people, in the public an incredible BS detector. It's really tough to put lipstick on a pig and try to hawk it to your consumers. So should all this be scary? Well, I think if you have something to hide, it should be, but it's the reality of today's world. And I think the importance of doing things the right way has never been greater. We all know the financial incentives, we talked about them here, but the running a more sustainable business, the value of our reputations and the public standing is just as good incentive as the financial one with how much damage can be done with our missteps. So companies that promote more sustainable business practice, I think they have to embrace it at every level of their operation. It's not kind of like a dip your toe in and test the temperature type of thing. And it's no longer about having a green week or doing a little something on Earth Day. As individuals and companies, I think we can minimize and eliminate the vulnerabilities to our criticism in our operations by fully embracing sustainability at every level of our operations. So authentically seeking out better ways to do things and changes that might not be the flashiest, but have the most impact can give you a better standing amongst your communities, but more importantly, I think as well, amongst your employees. So I'll share a couple cool stories. Dan Estey and Andrew Winston wrote a book called Green to Gold, and they have a great story in there that talks about IKEA and their path to what I think is serious street cred as a socially responsible company and an environmental leader. So in the early 90s, they had a series of supply chain problems, scandals actually, that cost them pretty big financially, and it really rocked their leadership. They had child labor in factories in Pakistan that were being exposed. They had wood being sourced from endangered rainforests. And they had illegally high levels of formaldehyde in one of their top-selling products, which really hurt them financially. So out of all these problems, a supplier audit system was born, which I think is pretty incredible for a company of its size. The IKEA way of purchasing home furnishing products, they're not good at names, but they more simply call it iWay, has 80 employees working in offices around the world. They visit suppliers and they rate them on their social and environmental performance. So 18 more employees are foresters by training, and they're responsible for evaluating all the sourcing of the company's wood for the products. So the cool thing about the later group, the foresters, that group is actually bigger than some forestry departments of some countries. So this evaluation checklist of suppliers is 15 pages long. It can take a few days to complete, and it includes reminders for the auditors to explain the IKEA philosophy and make sure that the suppliers understand why the sustainable approach is important. So these suppliers, around the world, they've spent millions to clean up their operations, but not even without IKEA's help. IKEA stepped in with loans for suppliers to invest in more modern equipment, and it improves the supplier's profitability. So this, like all by itself, is very proactive stuff, and from a huge company. But this is the kicker. IKEA has extremely tight margins, and they're notorious penny pinchers. Some would even call them cheap. So there's an instance when their CEO, he was out visiting a store, and he witnessed an employee. He was sweeping up the dust and trash from the floor. And mixed into the trash were a few of like those little pencils that you use at IKEA when you're marking all the stuff that you want. So the CEO literally got down on his hands and knees, and he plucked out these like less than a penny pencils, and he explained to everybody how important it was not to waste such things. It's a waste of money. So with that being said, what's their budget for the auditing system for IWay? No one knows. IKEA's literally never calculated it. They've never added it up. The value to their company of lowering their supply chain risk is so high that all of the costs associated with the program are minor in comparison. So when companies have a mantra of do the right thing, the financial results, they do seem to follow. In IKEA's case, massive savings were found when the auditors in the field started making more direct connections to the suppliers, and they cut out multiple middlemen and slashing production costs. So this is immersing your company into sustainability and seeing the full life cycle of your products and company and being proactive to avoid future pitfalls. Now, DuPont was another company facing extremely heavy criticism in the early 90s. They were labeled America's biggest polluter, and perhaps even the biggest polluter in the entire world. So new CEO, Ed Woolard, he knew he had to change not only the operation of DuPont's many factories, but also the perception of his company, because it was an environmental disaster, and people thought that of it. So he understood that to do this seismic change in his company, and to do it credibly, that he had to lead the way and to be its biggest proponent. So he set lofty goals right from the start. His motto to the executives and to the plant leaders throughout the company was zero waste. So this was a company that was creating 35 million pounds of toxic waste every year. They make things like spandex, luggage, seatbelts, pantyhose, and they had like nasty waste, like benzene, sulfuric acid, that they were literally just dumping into pits. So most of DuPont's products, like IKEA's, they had tight margins already. So finding a solution that made financial sense for them was a pretty daunting challenge. So executives met, they sat in a room, they brainstormed, they crunched numbers, and they came back to Woolard with a $500 million price tag for the changes. His reply was wrong answer. That's it. Sent him back to the room. So after more meetings and ideas, they were actually able to come up with a much better answer. And they said $200 million for all these changes. And he's like, wrong answer. So Woolard knew he had some amazing talent in that room, amazing ideas amongst those executives, and he knew they could do better. And so, of course, by the next meeting, the executives came back to him with the correct answer. The net present cost to the company would be zero. They sat in that room, they figured out a way with the engineers to reduce the toxins at the source by changing the processes. They were able to find markets for byproducts that were once considered waste by DuPont. And they worked with local communities with many initiatives, but things like building wetlands around their plants that could help naturally clean wastewater. So these, amongst other changes, dropped their waste by 70%. To under 10 million pounds by 2002, just in a few years. These huge reductions happened even while production grew. So I believe when there's really strong leadership that demands real change, it can be done. There's innovations waiting in the brains of employees at every level of your companies. So now instead of being an environmental nightmare, it's not perfect, but DuPont is hitting its sustainability goals, such as 10% energy from renewables, even while saving $8 million a year in energy costs. So these, of course, are pretty good examples where intentions and enthusiasm for sustainability are good. But there's also examples where they have that enthusiasm, they have the good intentions, but maybe the real impact is lacking. There's a car company that spent $2 billion overhauling their headquarters. And this was in response to the chairman's commitment to bringing the company's giant factory into the 21st century. Now, it actually is a pretty amazing place. It's got a 10-acre living roof. It captures rainwater. It reduces the energy used in the building. The site has solar panels, fuel cells, wetlands. So this is the kind of thing that turns a company green, right? Like, seems pretty simple. Well, while that company was spending $2 billion on its factory, another company was investing a massive amount of money in developing a more efficient fleet of cars. And they became the green car company because they made the real difference. See, the car company's real impact comes from the tailpipe and efficiency of the end product, not the factory that makes them. So while the leaders had great intentions and they wanted to do the right thing, and they were successful in building an amazing sustainable factory, they missed the target of creating the perception, but also the reality of their company being an environmental leader. So I love the success stories, and we can learn from them all day long. But I think it's also important to have the time to learn from companies and people that would probably make a different decision in hindsight. So in the sustainability world, the popular mantra is do the right thing. And it does. It guides companies to financial success, gives them a great public image of their brand. But we think it's really important that there's two meanings to this phrase, and both have to be treated with equal importance. So building the revolutionary factory for this car company came from the chairman wanting to do the right thing. He did the right thing. But it wasn't the right thing to do. So in the sports world, we're doing some amazing things in our venues, no doubt. These investments are saving venues a lot of money, and they're making our operations more efficient. So while we are guided by doing the right thing, let's remember to also check the impacts, both inside of our four walls and outside of them as well. So I know it's been talked about a bit over the last few days, but what has the biggest carbon footprint when holding a big sporting event? Without a doubt, transportation. All those people driving their cars to the game creates a massive amount of CO2. Well, TerraPass did a calculation of a couple venues, and their results were pretty staggering. Dodger Stadium, I think that's Dodger Stadium, yeah, has 16,000 parking spots. And so if you take an average commute in an average car, Dodger fans would have driven 960,000 miles and pumped out about 830,000 pounds of CO2 for a game. You know, for the Jets and the Giants who play at MetLife Stadium, they have 23,800 parking spots. And that would add up to 1.5 million miles driven and 1.2 million pounds of CO2 every game. So maybe it's not the sexiest initiative, but making a priority of working with your city officials and its mass transit system to get this footprint down would have a massive impact. So an example of this is happening in my hometown. For both the CFLs, the Canadian Football Leagues, Edmonton Eskimos, and also where we hold many events, but also like the Women's World Cup in Edmonton this year. So every game ticket can also be scanned for free public transit to the game. You just take your ticket, you scan it, it gets you into the game, but it also gets you into transit. So looking at only the surface of an initiative like this, I can see the team owners already saying, one would think that they might miss out on parking revenue, and it might be viewed as a negative. But the benefits cannot be ignored as well. Lower footprint, of course, but also better fan experience. Those that do drive to the game will have decreased traffic and more available parking. There'll be less drunk driving incidents from the venue as well, which will probably go hand in hand with increased beer sales in the game. One of the initiatives I studied at Harvard this year was how best to impact the water footprint of sporting events. So in the past, I was very impressed with the installation of low-flow toilets and waterless urinals at some of the biggest arenas around the league. But after looking at what could have the biggest impact, however, I was brought into the kitchens of the venues. First Energy Stadium, where the Browns play in Cleveland, and AT&T Stadium, where the Cowboys play in Dallas, they're just a couple of examples that I studied that have made significant changes to their stadium concession operations. From more local food sourcing to chef-inspired, healthier menu options that changes Their changes have increased the quality of the options for fans, but also the revenues. You can see how excited they are about the vegetarian options. But these teams, I'm not even sure if they're even aware of the full impact that something like vegetarian options have, and non-beef menu items actually have. So the water footprint, I'm sure I'm talking to a pretty good group. Everybody knows what water footprint is. The water footprint of a single hamburger is equal to 488 flushes of a low-flow toilet. So think about that, 488 flushes for one hamburger. So if I take my family to the ball game and order 5 burgers, now the water footprint's 3,170 gallons of water. So that's 2,500 flushes for my family. So let's scale up. I crunched the numbers from the 2014 Major League Baseball All-Star festivities in Minnesota. So approximately 1,000 pounds of ground beef was served at Target Field, mainly as burgers. The water footprint of this single menu item from one game is 1,902,000 gallons. And that's a really big number. It really probably means nothing to you right now. And I really don't know what that looks like in water. So I looked for something that we could picture. So an Olympic swimming pool, they're huge. They really are. They're massive. They can hold up to 660,000 gallons of water. So the footprint of those burgers at that one single game is equal to 3 of those, 3 Olympic pools. And those low-flow toilets that are pretty awesome, well, they would need to be flushed almost 1.5 million times to equal that. So this isn't a session to convince everyone to stop serving burgers, but the impact of your menu options should be calculated and they should be recognized. So ideas can come from anywhere if you empower people at every level of your company and actually listen to them and incentivize them. So I was hurt a couple years in Boston, and the injured players watched the game up on the 9th floor, where the media is also sitting. So I rode the elevator up with an intern. That's not her, but she was carrying a stack almost that big of paper that had game notes and stats that the media uses. And so I was talking to her about her free workout, and she was telling me that this was just one of multiple trips to deliver piles upon piles of paper to the media and to the teams. Not only that, she had to sit in front of the printer for an insane amount of time while this mountain of paper was spit out. So I'm sure the exact same thing happens in probably most arenas, in most leagues, for every game. So how much paper do we use? And how much ink do we use? And how much time is wasted in this seemingly archaic practice? I don't think there's a single member of the media that doesn't come to the games now without a smartphone or a laptop. Now, how hard is it to have those exact same game notes and stats accessible through the team and league websites? In fact, I'm pretty sure they're already there. So what would the impact be if we all moved away from these paper deliveries? Now, how much money or ink or time would we all collectively save? And this was the intern's idea. So constantly questioning and evaluating our performance on sustainability issues is healthy. It's also essential to involve everyone, from top management, middle managers, and frontline workers. You have to incorporate them into the philosophy and the plan of what you're trying to accomplish. So not only will this have everyone on the same page with what you're trying to do, but it also opens up the ability to tap into some great ideas that could lead you to real innovation. The next great money, time, and energy saver could probably be sitting in the head of one of your employees right now, who sees something about what they do every day and knows there's a better way to do it. They need the incentive, though, and they need the platform to speak. So don't just rely on the green team to come up with the whole plan and all the wonderful ideas. They might be the ones who can best implement the plan. But by challenging people at every level of the company to not only reduce, reuse, recycle, but challenge them to redesign and reimagine how we're doing things. And it opens up the possibility of major advances through their innovative ideas. So nobody wants to be known as Company Alpha, the water waster, or Company Beta, the polluter. So even though you might be doing some great things in your company, how your community and also how your employees feel about your environmental performance is just as important as the facts. So cover your bases by incorporating good, sustainable decision-making and idea implementation at every level of what you do. Thank you.